Welcome to the Versa Business Tips Podcast. I'm your host, founder and CEO of Versa Business Systems, Shaheen Mazloom. We are here with a very special guest today. So, Interview Valet, we have their Senior Client Account Manager, Kristen Nolan, with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Me too. So, we're on a podcast and coincidentally, we're going to be talking about podcasts. So for those out there that don't know who you are and what you do, tell us a little bit about you and what Interview Valet does.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm a senior client account manager at Interview Valet. And I specialize in strategically placing industry leaders on influential podcasts to elevate their visibility, expand their reach, and strengthen their brand authority. Think of me like a matchmaker for podcasts. My role is all about precision matching, connecting our clients with the right podcast audiences to maximize the impact of each appearance. So one of the things that we do here at Interview Valet is we know how valuable the right podcast exposure can be. And I'm just, I'm here to ensure that our clients get the perfect fit to showcase their expertise and drive results.
Right. Podcasts have just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over the last few years. Would you say nowadays more people get their news and information from podcasts other than any other avenue?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's funny. I had never listened to a podcast until I started with Interview Valet about 3 years ago. And I think now you find that people listen to podcasts more than ever.
Yeah.
And there's something for everyone, right? Like I was speaking with a colleague of mine and they were talking about pickleball podcasts. Like if you're marketing to pickleball people, there's a podcast for that.
Right.
So, anything and everything you could possibly want, podcasting has for you.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, it's funny you say that because I never listened to a podcast before until after I started my podcast.
Yeah. Yep. It's crazy. People, just get into it and it's something they really enjoy. I have a lot of clients that both are hosts and guests. So
yeah, absolutely. So what is the importance of having your own podcast as a business owner nowadays?
So I think looking at it, like if you have your own podcast, I think it's a really great tool to connect and network with other people.
Right.
And, you get to meet all different kinds of people. And so on the hosting side, you get to sort of drive the conversation, right? You control the conversation. Whereas when you're a guest, you're letting someone else drive the conversation and you're working with them to sort of highlight your expertise and what you can offer their listeners.
Right.
Yeah.
100%. That's what I've realized mostly. I thought of it as a lead generation tool when I first started, and I realized it's the opposite, right? I'm using it for content and networking and even learning. Like honestly, like I've learned so much, even from my own business and taken away so many great things. It's helped my business grow tremendously just by having this podcast. And it's been a really cool journey. I think we're on like almost episode 50. I think this is number 50.
Yeah.
It's been really cool. So are there certain industries where a podcast may not make sense? Like you mentioned pickleball, but like, is there certain industries where there just may not be podcasts or it may not make sense? Or is it really like wide open?
I think like really the sky's the limit, right? Like there is something for everyone. Like we have like an internal chat and there was a client that was looking for like podcast catered to laundromat owners. And there's a podcast for that, surprisingly.
Interesting.
So it's like pretty much whatever you want to, listen to or talk about, there's generally speaking something for that. And if you find that there isn't, then that's a great opportunity to start something, right?
Yeah. No joke. So what is the, we talked about, obviously having a podcast, it's a great platform to control the conversation. It's good for content and networking. And then on the flip side of that, of getting on other people's podcasts, let's talk about that real quick. So, you're being interviewed by somebody who's an expert, right? So how do you guys go about picking the podcast that you put people on? Like, what is the, criteria that you're looking for in somebody's podcast?
Yeah. So I think really the first part to having success in this is really defining who your target audience is, right? Like you have to be very specific. It can't be like, and I've had clients where they'll say just entrepreneurs in general. And for some people that works, right? But one of the great things about podcast interview marketing is that you can get in front of, 1,000, 2,000 or more people that are all going to be potential clients of yours, right? So like
Right.
sometimes people are like, I just want to be on big shows. I want to be on Joe Rogan. I want, whatever. But the thing
Yeah,
is
good
like
luck with
the
that.
right. And the benefit of it is that you're really targeted. So I explained this to a client the other day, right? So you could be going to an NFL stadium and they could ask you to speak at halftime. No one cares about you. They're there to watch football. They're there to watch the cheerleaders. You're
Right.
giving a message and they're totally tuning you out, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you're on a podcast and your primary target audience is going to be dentists, well, there's a podcast that has all these dentists listening to it. So you're going to find that there's more value in being targeted on, a dental podcast versus just being in a big room of people that have no care in the world about what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so like there's obviously, you mentioned Joe Rogan, right? So from my understanding, he doesn't charge people to be on there. He's very specific. He picks who he wants to talk to, right? Who he's genuinely interested in having a conversation with.
Yeah.
And they're pretty long, right? They're hours long. I don't think I've ever gone through a whole podcast of Joe Rogan's. I like the snippets and the reels and that stuff. But at what point in your podcast journey should people start charging guests? So the reason why I ask this is, for example, Ty Lopez, his team calls me and they're like, "Hey man, $100,000 and we'll put you on on his podcast and you come out to this party and da da da." I'm like, $100,000. I go and look at the guy's numbers on YouTube and I'm like, I'm getting the same amount of views on some of my episodes. Like, why would I pay you $100,000? Like, I mean, should I be charging $100,000 for people to be on my show? Like, at what point should you start, getting sponsors and charging people to be on your podcast?
So I think that's a really great question. I see larger podcasts that, charge. That's one of the things that, I find to be interesting. And some of your larger podcasts do charge, some do not, right? So, and then the prices vary, right?
Yeah,
I had a client
like anywhere from a few thousand to like I was just blown away. I'm like, really? People are paying you $100,000 to go on their podcast or for to have you on theirs? Like it's just mind. Like, what do you mean 100,000? I don't know how anybody could justify that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down to the exposure, and you're talking about shows that are in like that top 0.0001%.
So they say, but like when I looked at his numbers, at least on YouTube, like it's my like I said, my podcast maybe gets, I think he had his average views on his YouTube for a podcast was like 20,000 views.
Yeah.
My average is like 4,000 views. So it's like, if he's charging $100,000 for 20,000 views on YouTube, I should be able to charge 40,000. You know what I mean?
And I think
crazy.
Yeah. And there are like various metrics, especially like as I'm looking at potential shows for my clients, right? So I take into account, it's not just like one specific number or like one specific thing that, kind of says, yes, this is a good fit or no. I think it really comes down to, the like social media numbers, right? We think about exposure. How many people are you going to reach? Do they have, like if your primary bulk of potential clients are on LinkedIn, then obviously we're going to focus on how many LinkedIn followers they have, right?
Right. So it's the overall. I got you. So it's not just specific. It's not just specifically how many people you have following your podcast, but overall how much exposure you're going to get on Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever your target audience is spending time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it isn't just like when I go and I'm prospecting for my clients or approving shows, there isn't like a one size fits all, right? Like I get to know my client, I get to know, what is it that's important to them? What is their target audience? And another thing that I do is I also consider like personality of the host, right? Like I want to make sure that it's a good conversation. I don't want to have two people on a show and it just not have the synergy or like not be a good experience for everyone.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I love about podcasting, I always tell people this, right? Like a great podcast to me is when I feel like I'm sitting in a coffee shop, like listening in on two people having a conversation. And I
Right.
think that's a great way for you. Like, before I joined Interview Valet, I was in sales, right? And the dreaded cold call, right? You never want to like cold call people. I get tons of messages on LinkedIn, and I'm like, nobody's ever bought from a LinkedIn message. But with podcast interview marketing, you have the ability to highlight your personality, your expertise, and what you offer them. And so
Right.
it's almost like you get to sort of try before you buy. And I tell all my clients this. Sometimes they'll say, well, I don't want to be on a podcast with someone that does the same thing or someone that could be a potential competitor to me. And I always say this, I say there's room at the table for everyone.
Yeah.
And something that you say could resonate with a listener, and all the listeners that you have may not be your clients, but you could go on, I could go on as a guest, and they say, oh, I really like what Kristen has to say. I really like her approach to
Yeah.
this. And so then it's just more organic, right? It's not
Right.
forced. It's not cold. They have an idea of what to expect with you and what you offer them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't know why a competitor would ever want me on their show. But I guess that happens, right? Like why,
Yeah.
like from my point of view, like if I just don't. I understand how that would be like. I wouldn't want. I don't think I would want to be on somebody with the same industry, just because I would almost feel bad because I know I would be taking clients from
Yeah.
them.
Well, and the thing is, like, you may have, a couple thousand listeners, right? Maybe all couple thousand of them, like, they're maybe not your clients personally, but there's
Yeah.
still, there's still people that listen that aren't.
Yeah.
And I think it really comes down to like personality, right? People do business with
Yeah.
people they like, they
That's
know, and
true.
they trust. And so
Yeah.
I think it's really just a great opportunity to, really highlight what you are, what you offer and who you are.
Yeah. Very good point. And so,
Yeah.
there's so many different platforms for podcasts
Mhm.
nowadays, right? You've got, so obviously the main ones are like Apple and Spotify and Google. Actually, I think Google Podcast, is that even still a thing? But
Yeah,
anyways,
yeah. I'm
there's
an
just
Apple
so many
girl, so
right,
yep.
exactly. So like is it important to be on as many platforms as possible, or is it really just important to be on the main ones like your Apple, Spotify, Google, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just depends, right? And I like where your potential clients hang
And
out,
how do you
right?
figure that out, right? Like, so like for me, I don't know where business owners go and get their podcast information from. Like, is that something you can just search online and figure out, or is that where you guys have the data
Yeah.
behind it and you're able to figure that out?
Yeah. So we source quite a few databases to get various kinds of data. So it's not like we're
Right.
just going to one website and pulling it and saying this is, whatever. We source
Right.
various different databases to get the information. And, I had a client, he came on, and one of the things he was really fascinated with is like, we have a database that we source that you could give me a website. You could say, hey, my people hang out on this particular website, and I can put that website in this database, and I can pull out what podcasts they listen to.
Really?
Yeah. So there's so many ways and so many different databases that you can go on to really get information that sometimes would surprise and shock you that is out there, right?
Right. So like there's a way for you, like if I sent you a list of all of our customers'
Mhm.
email addresses, you'd be able to say, okay, well, it looks like most of these are, getting their podcasts from Apple or Spotify or
Well,
whatever.
not like that, but I mean, like, what particular podcast they listen to. So
I
it wouldn't
gotcha.
be like, Apple and Spotify, but it would be, they listen to your podcast, or they listen to various
Right.
other specific podcasts. Yeah.
I gotcha. Very cool.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
wild that what the information that you can get, right? There's all these privacy laws, but
Mhm.
you seem to be able to find out anything about anybody, some
Yeah,
way,
I
shape,
mean,
or
and
form.
you can get demographics, right? So you're
Yeah.
able to really hone in on the data, and that's something that we, really focus on at Interview Valet is like, we really focus on the data and getting, ensuring that there is, adequate data to show, what the value is in this
Right.
particular show and things like that.
Right. Absolutely. So starting out a podcast, I noticed that once I had a certain amount of subscribers
Mhm.
and views on my episodes, that's when companies like you guys started
Mhm.
reaching out to me saying, "Hey, we've got a potential guest for you. Are you interested?" But I also know, I've noticed some people that I know personally that have a great podcast, but their numbers are just, they've done, say 100 episodes and they're still only averaging 100 or 200 views an episode, and they're not getting a bunch of traction. What is the best advice you can give to someone who has a podcast that most people don't know or realize that they can in order to increase their numbers?
Yeah. So I think that really comes down to promotion, right? When I go on as a guest, or when I advise my guests, or my clients as guests, I advise them that it's not just showing up and being on the podcast and having a conversation. There
Yeah.
is a lot of things that go on after that. It is, taking the information and promoting it, right?
Yeah.
It is going in and from each podcast episode you should have a month's worth of content that you can pull from that.
Right.
So, it's really, it comes down to promotion. So if people are just recording podcasts and kind of putting them out there and hoping that, they take off, that's not the approach that I would suggest personally.
Right.
I would definitely suggest, it comes with the promotion part of it.
Yeah, for
It comes
sure.
with, taking clips from the episode and really important and key things that you're discussing, and sharing that so that you can grow your listenership.
Right. Right. Now, so for me personally, I generally do 3 or 4 reels per episode.
Mhm.
I do a new episode every single week. So it's
Yeah.
if I did 20 reels of each one, all my content would just be podcasts. And I
Right.
feel like it would be a little overwhelming. Is that a good number? 3 or 4 reels per episode, or should that really be higher, or is it really just dependent on the
You know,
audience?
Yeah, I think it just depends on the podcast itself, right? So I
Right.
think, if you have a lot of good information, use the good
Right. So
information. If
don't
you
just
don't,
don't just post it just to have more, if
yeah,
take the pertinent information that people are actually going to find interesting. And if you
yes.
can do more than 4,
Yeah.
great, but don't just do it just to do it.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
very much a quality over quantity, right?
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
rather do something 5 times really well than 20
Yes.
times, kind of borderline. And
Yeah,
so
for
I
sure.
think that, as you move through the process, I think just finding the quality content that's going to be the most value to your listeners or to
Yeah.
your potential clients, and really leaning into that. I
Yeah.
always advise my clients, find what makes you different, right? Maybe you're an executive coach and there's a million executive coaches. What makes you different? Or you're a business coach. What is it that makes you different that would draw those people in? So I always tell people to lean into their strengths.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Now, one thing I've noticed is so some guests, they'll have, they'll have Facebook and Instagram
Mhm.
and LinkedIn, and I'll be able to tag them on these different platforms. But one thing I've noticed is they don't always, most of the time, they're not sharing that information, which I find strange, because it's you're on our podcast,
Mhm.
we're promoting your company and your brand. Why would you not share that information? Especially you took the time to get on the show, and
Yeah.
we had a great conversation, whatever. Is there some advice that you can give for people to push their guests to share more content? And because I give them everything. I give them
Yeah.
all the reels and the full audio and video, and do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for getting people to be more engaged in sharing that content to their audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to go on a podcast and be a guest, I look at it as being a guest in someone's home, right? You want to make sure that you're not just there to take advantage of their platform. So whatever value that you can bring as a guest, is the same thing, right? You don't show up to someone's house empty-handed, or at least I don't.
Right.
And so, I think of it as sort of, if you want to be successful and you want to continue to be a guest and continue to be invited,
Right.
that's really the key. And I'll tell you one other thing that my clients have found really great success with is that being a podcast guest is not a transaction, right? You're not going on, having a 30-minute conversation going on your way. Like, you want to nurture that relationship so
Yes.
that, maybe that person can be a center of influence. Maybe I've had clients who have become clients of the host and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
I've had a podcast host love one of my clients so much that he asked her to come and do, a keynote speech at an in-person event.
Very cool.
I've had another client.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunities are
yeah.
endless, right? Like,
Yep.
if you're having a conversation with somebody about something that you're interested in, you guys have similar interests, similar clientele, etc. Like, there should be synergy and there should be other stuff going on after the podcast, right? Like, what is a good way to capture that and make sure the conversation keeps moving forward after the show?
Yeah. So I always advise my clients, as soon as an invitation comes through for them, immediately go to LinkedIn and add the host on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I always do that. I always add them on every platform I can find them on.
And then that way, like, once, like, you as a host, right, you'll go in and you'll share it on LinkedIn and maybe you'll tag the person. So that gives them the immediate knowledge that their episode is now live and it's out there.
Yeah.
The easiest thing that someone could do is simply just share that post. It's super easy, takes 2 minutes. Share that post. Maybe you put a couple of, hey, I had a great conversation. Check out the podcast here. It doesn't have to be anything crazy.
Yeah.
And in doing that, it shows. And I tell my clients this too. I'm like, if a host sees you sharing something, they're more inclined to share it, right? So if we're having a conversation and you see that I'm sharing it every day for a week, you're going to go,
100%.
okay.
I'm more likely to share your stuff and your business and your 100%.
Yep. So I think it really comes down to, like, what you put into it is what you can get out of it.
What goes around comes around, 100%. I mean, that's with anything, right? Like, so we've gone over some great things that really help, boost an episode or a podcast as a whole. What are some major mistakes that you're seeing people make when it comes to podcasts, either growing or starting a podcast? Is there any consistent mistakes that you're seeing people make?
I mean, I think it really comes down to, like, the promotion piece, like we've talked about.
Right.
And I think that,
or lack thereof.
Right. Yeah. Or there are people that don't know their target audience. Right. And so I think it's really important that before you go into, creating a podcast or being a podcast guest, that you really define that and you really know who you're targeting and why you're targeting them. Also, that what problem you're solving for them. So it's not just going on a podcast and saying, so
the same strategies as any marketing.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Like, I mean, any marketing you're doing, you've got to make sure you have your story straight, your, the problems you're solving, your ask, your price, you've got to have all that stuff figured out for any type of marketing. So you're saying podcasting is no different.
So podcasting is no different in that regard. I think the one thing that I think makes it different is that authentic connection, right? So if you're doing a 30-second commercial, you're spending 30 seconds, you're talking about yourself, and that's it. Yeah. Whereas if you're going on a podcast and you're a guest, you're able to really have a 30-minute or so conversation, and you're able to offer the listener something, right? It's not just them listening to you talk about yourself. It's you having an authentic conversation and a connection, which is really what I think sets podcasting apart from other traditional marketing. Options.
Oh yeah, definitely. 100%. So, like, if somebody wants help getting on more podcasts or getting on podcasts in general, right? What is the best way to go about reaching out to you guys? Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah. So I have a welcome page, and it is Interview Valet with a V. .com/Kristen, which is Kristen.
Okay. And I'll put the link in the description. That way people can just click on it.
Perfect. Yeah. And on there, you'll find a quick questionnaire. just an assessment that you can take to see if podcast guesting is a good fit for you.
Right.
Also, we have Tom Schwab, our CEO. He wrote a book, and it's, it goes in depth on kind of the process to being a guest on podcasts. And then obviously, if you want to learn more about, being a podcast guest, obviously we have, a call that you can have with Tom.
Right. Very cool. And now if somebody has a podcast and they're like, I want more guests, like, is that a service you guys offer as well? Or is it just, you guys reach out to those when they get their numbers right or their,
Yeah. So, I mean, to anybody that I would say that is looking for guests, you can feel free to email me. I'm Kristen, Kristen at Interview Valet. I am happy to put you in contact with the right people. We do have, a couple of different teams and stuff. So I'm happy to sort of funnel through what that looks like. And we are always welcoming, hosts and guests.
Great. Awesome. So with that link, I'm going to include in the description, they can get that book. How much is it? Or is that a free?
It's a free. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
We'll just send it right to you.
Very cool. Awesome. Yeah. So I'll make sure I include that link. It's been great talking to you, Kristen.
Thank you so much.
The podcast, it's been a fun ride, but I appreciate having these conversations with people that are in the industry because I learn more and more as I'm trying to grow this thing. So thank you very much for hopping on with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for always being such a great guest. I know I've had a few clients on your podcast and, always great things. So
yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome.